I was reading up a little bit about you, and you said that in 2006 you had an incident. Um, for the viewers, do you mind talking about what that incident was?
Oh, that was I call it the perfect morning, man. It was around my 17th year, and I was E7, and I was working on my master sergeant rank to become an E8, and so that was the school that's required to graduate and be on the promotion list. So I'm there, like normal. I've done that test, like I said, about 17 years. Twice a year we take it, and I got up, did the push-up, sit-ups, and I was out doing the 2 mile run. And when I came across for that last lap, I could hear the instructor, 15:45, 15:46. And I'm like, hey, I'm cool. Like, I'm 36 years old. So I had like 17:21 and I hear 15. And I'm like, oh, shoot, I'm about to, get a good score. And so we're trained to sprint that last lap. And so my brain kicked in, hey, let's get this run over with. So I take off. And I did feel like this electrical charge like come over my body, but I didn't think nothing of it. So I, sprinted 16 minutes, great time, put my hands over my head, get air in my lungs, all the stuff we're trained to do. And all of a sudden my peripheral got dark. And I'm like, man, I don't feel well. And then I started getting nauseous. And so I closed my eyes, I laid down on the ground. And when I opened my eyes, everything was spinning like a million miles an hour. Medics came and got me, took me to the hospital, and the doctor comes in at some point and says, "You ever had kidney problems?" I says, "No." He said, "What do you do now?" And then he walks out,
What?
and I'm like, "What?" And so my instructor's there, and I'm like, "What's going on?" So the doctor comes back in and says, "You know what? It's probably a freak accident. You was probably dehydrated, heat stroke." I'm like, "It's like 6:30 in the morning, bro. Like, what heat stroke are you talking about?" And so he's like, "I'm gonna give you one more IV. Go back to the barracks, take the day off. You should be fine." So I did that, and I woke up probably like around 2 o'clock or so, and I was worse. Like I was throwing up, everything was still spinning. I was nauseated, like I was in a real bad state. So I lay back down, and I know it's 4:30 because my classmates come into barracks, and they're like, "You okay?" I'm like, "No, I'm not." So they rushed me back to the hospital that night, and the night doctor did some tests. And there's a condition called a rhabdomyolysis, which is a skeletal muscular disorder. And so what was happening was my muscles had started to leak negative, myoglobin, like muscle particles, into my bloodstream, and also releasing negative toxins from the muscles. So that was causing the renal failure that the doctor saw in the morning. But obviously he didn't recognize it, whatever that was. But the night doctor saw it, and they can tell by your creatinine kinase levels, which is CK levels, and mine were 12,000 and rising, and at my age it was supposed to be like 150.
Wow.
So when he saw those numbers, he was like, "Hey, like this is connected to this condition." And so uh, what he did was he just put me on IVs for 4 days. That's how long it took to flush my kidneys, and my kidneys were at about 50% each by the time I got to the hospital that night. So I was dying having renal failure.
Wow. And is that like was that condition instantaneous or was that built up over time?
So that was 2006. 2010, I'm on the base because now the military is trying to diagnose me. I could barely walk. I'm having problems. And now I'm having mental health issues because I think my career is over. And I happened to pass the officer that I served with during the war. We were together in 04, 05. He was my platoon leader. So we passed on the base in the car and we pulled over. He's like, "How you been?" I'm like, "Man, you don't want to know." He's like, "Nah, tell me." And so I'm like, "Man, my muscles, like I can barely walk." I said, I think I'm getting depressed. Like I don't even want to live no more." He's like, "You know what? Something like that happened to me where my muscles locked up, but I have sickle cell trait. So I have to drink extra water, take these vitamins." And I'm like, wait. Why does that sound familiar? And then I remembered my physical from 1999 that the Air Force Base found my trait. And so when he said that, it triggered my memory. I went and got that paperwork, and sure enough, it said positive sickle cell trait. And so I went home and did research and was like, found that athletes, military people exercising have collapsed and have died from that condition with the rhabdomyolysis. And so when I took it to my rheumatologist, because now I have arthritis and I have to see this rheumatologist, I took it to her like, hey, can you check this out? Because I think this is what happened to me. And so she looked it over and she retested my blood again. Sure enough, positive sickle cell trait. And we were able to diagnose that incident from 2006 to connect it with the rhabdo and my trait. Because what happened was my red blood cells that are trait mutated. And so I lost oxygen through the mutation of the red blood cells, and that's triggered the rhabdo. So it was like that whole combination. So yeah, it ended my career.
Mm-hmm. So it was like a slow burn.
Oh man, it was bad.
Brutal. How do you? So you've had this since like you were diagnosed firstly with in 1999 for it.
For the sickle cell trait, yeah.
Yeah. So how were you able to physically get through military training?
Well, so what's oddly is when I started now in becoming this advocate, when I look back, the army, what they do is they test for anemia. So I don't know what happened, but I went through the physical like everybody else. But I believe the Army they test for anemia. Now the Air Force, the Marine Corps, the Navy, because of those certain job skills, that is on their checklist to test because of the pilots and scuba diving is not good for people with sickle cell trait. So those compressed air kind of jobs are not good for a person with trait. So those branches do test for it, but for whatever reason, I can't tell you that why the Army did not find it.
Mm. And have they changed that, or is it still not being tested?
So recently, they put out an article that they are starting to test for sickle cell trait because there was, like I said, from it's been happening since the 70s and 80s, and so I'm not going to say that I influenced that, but there's been a lot of conversations I've had, and I go to military bases to speak. And I know when I collapsed in '06, it went across to all of the military schools about my incident. So, and I met doctors that have been working with the military to figure out what's causing it. And even there's a military college that I've worked with in the last 2 years that they're doing research to find out why African American soldiers, why some have this collapse and some don't. So I think they're trying to figure out and just keep everybody safe. And so the Army has now announced officially that they are going to be testing specifically for sickle cell trait.
It's huge, man.
Yeah,
So,
I don't really agree with it
mhm,
because there are 400 plus types of red blood cell conditions, and so to single one out,
true.
that's where it gets kind of the level of you know are they going to use that against me? But there are other red blood cells like D trait, C trait, thalassemia, OARAB that, if expressed with exertion, could trigger the same kind of incident. So I don't. Yes, I want to protect trait carriers, but we don't want people to have that impact their ability to have a career
Hmm.
in the service as well. So it's a real fine line. And then I look at what's the value of life. Then after that.
Yeah, right. I wonder if they'll be able to find something where, like a test where they can just identify a red blood cell issue as opposed to singling it to it or like narrowing it down to one specific thing.
Well, they do have a hemoglobin electrophoresis is a test. So
Mm,
it's like a blood test that how those red blood cells mutate is how they determine what inherited gene you have because it's all inherited.
right.
So they do have that in place. Some of those red blood cell conditions don't get tested at birth, um, or you have to do extra tests to find out. And a lot of parents don't know until something like that happens.
Hmm. So it's inherited. So did one of your parents have it?
Yes, my dad. My dad had it, and we believe that his dad had it, and so because he had a cousin, I have a cousin with sickle cell disease, and my dad's couple of my dad's sisters have the trait, and my other cousin has the trait. So again, I didn't know. Um, when I was 5 years old, my left arm would ache like crazy, and my grandmother would hold me over the sink and run warm water over it. Only thing that would soothe the pain. and they told my parents in 75 it was growing pains. Well, I'm 50, and that pain it ain't went away.
You're still growing.
Yeah, I'm still growing because it ain't went away. So what we're discovering now, as I've been doing this advocacy work, is that some people with sickle cell trait, we do have complications, and we do have pain, and some people have died from exertion. So, and it hasn't really been addressed.